Every December, millions of people around the world dust off their nativity scenes and hang images of a familiar face. A pale man with flowing brown hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and soft, almost European features. This is Jesus Christ, the most recognized face in history. But here's the thing. The real Jesus of Nazareth almost certainly looked nothing like that. He wasn't a blue-eyed man from Northern Europe. He wasn't fair-skinned, and he definitely wasn't the ethereal, gentle-featured figure who graces Renaissance paintings, stained glass windows, and church murals from Rome to rural America. If Jesus really existed, and the vast majority of historians agree that he did, he was a Jewish man born and raised in the Middle East. His skin was brown, his hair was dark and curly, his build was likely strong, the result of hard labor as a carpenter, and he probably looked far more like the average Palestinian or Israeli man than anyone hanging on a Christmas card today. So how did we get from the dark-skinned rabbi of Galilee to the Nordic savior of Western imagination? The answer isn't just about art. It's about power, identity, empire, and the deep psychological need for people to see themselves in their gods. This is the story of how the face of faith was rewritten, and why that still matters today. Let's start with what we actually know. The Bible offers almost no physical description of Jesus. There's no mention of his height, build, or the color of his hair and eyes. The only reference we get is in the book of Isaiah, which says, "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him." In other words, Jesus wasn't described as striking, handsome, or physically radiant. He was ordinary, unremarkable, just another man in a crowd. In 2001, forensic anthropologists used skulls from 1st century Judea to create a facial reconstruction of what a Galilean man from Jesus' time might have looked like. The result shocked a lot of people. A short, dark-skinned, dark-eyed man with coarse, curly hair and a broad face. To many Western Christians, this face was jarring, because it didn't look like Jesus. But that was the point. For nearly 2,000 years, we've been conditioned to think of Jesus as European. That conditioning didn't come from the Bible. It came from history. The earliest Christians, in the 1st and 2nd centuries, didn't depict Jesus at all. For them, images were associated with paganism. But as Christianity spread into the Roman Empire, converts wanted to visualize the figure they worshipped. They didn't know what Jesus looked like, so they made him look like themselves. By the 3rd century, Jesus was being painted in the robes of a Roman philosopher, with short hair and no beard, essentially a respectable Roman citizen. Over time, as Christianity became the empire's official religion, the image evolved again. By the 6th century, Byzantine artists began giving Jesus a beard, longer hair, and a more solemn face, features associated with wisdom and divinity. These depictions spread throughout Europe, and by the time of the Middle Ages, the image of a white, bearded, European-looking Christ had become the standard. But that wasn't just art, it was politics. When Europe became the heart of Christendom, rulers and popes realized something powerful. If Jesus looked like them, they could claim to represent him. His face became a tool of legitimacy. A white Jesus justified white rule. As European empires expanded across the world, missionaries brought this image with them. Paintings, statues, and Bibles all showed the same fair-skinned Savior, even when preaching to people who looked nothing like him. This wasn't always intentional racism. It was often just culture bias, but it carried the same message. Divinity looks European. And when that idea mixed with colonialism, it became poisonous. For centuries, colonized peoples were told that salvation came from a god who looked like their conquerors. That moral authority and whiteness were intertwined. That heaven itself might have a color code. In the Americas, in Africa, in Asia, the white Jesus became a symbol of civilization, morality, and dominance. And even as slavery and imperialism fell away, the Western world grew up with the face of God looking suspiciously like the people in power. Now it's important to be fair here. Most medieval painters didn't sit down and say, let's erase Jesus' ethnicity. They were painting the world as they knew it. Every culture throughout history had done this. Reimagined divine figures in their own image. But what makes the white Jesus unique is how universally it was imposed. It wasn't one cultural reinterpretation among many. It became the standard, the default, and over time, it became so entrenched that even suggesting Jesus wasn't white began to sound like blasphemy. In the 20th century, the image reached its peak with Warner Sallman's Head of Christ, the soft, glowing portrait that still hangs in countless churches and homes today. It's a gentle, idealized figure with golden hair and blue eyes. It's also, statistically speaking, the most reproduced image in human history. That painting did something subtle but powerful. It turned Jesus into an icon of American identity. During World War II, soldiers were given wallet-sized copies to carry with them into battle. In the Cold War, the same image was used to represent Christian freedom against godless communism. And so, Jesus the Middle Eastern revolutionary became Jesus the all-American savior. But this wasn't just cultural, it was psychological. People are naturally drawn to faces that resemble their own group. It's a form of self-identification that helps them feel closer to the divine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, until it becomes exclusive. When people only ever see one version of holiness, they start to associate goodness, beauty, and authority with that image. In the West, that meant associating godliness with whiteness. Even today, social psychology experiments show that when participants are shown images of a white Jesus, they unconsciously assign more positive traits to white faces in general. It's the halo effect, quite literally. That's how deeply an image can shape our subconscious. And that's why this conversation matters. It's not about artistic accuracy or political correctness. It's about how centuries of imagery have shaped who we think deserves to represent the divine. Because once you understand that, you start to see how it ripples through culture. It affects which actors get cast as messiahs in film. It influences which nations are viewed as moral leaders. It even informs which lives people instinctively value more in moments of crisis. And for Christians of color, this issue hits even closer to home. Imagine growing up praying to a God who looks nothing like you, while the world tells you your skin, your features, your heritage are less than ideal. That kind of imagery does real psychological harm. It tells you that holiness is light and that darkness of skin, of origin, of culture is something to overcome rather than embrace. But this story isn't just about erasure, it's about reclamation. All over the world, artists and theologians are creating new depictions of Jesus that reflect the full diversity of humanity. In Ethiopia, ancient icons show Jesus and Mary with rich brown skin, as they have for centuries. In Latin America, artists paint Christ as a campesino, a humble farmer. In Japan, he's shown with East Asian features, meditating in robes. In black churches of the American South, Jesus is black, a symbol of liberation and shared suffering. And in the Middle East, where his story began, you'll find depictions of Jesus as a dark-skinned Semitic man, closer to historic reality than most Western art ever dared to show. These aren't acts of revision, they're acts of restoration. They remind us that faith isn't supposed to belong to one race or region. It's supposed to speak to everyone. In recent years, even mainstream churches have begun to embrace this. Some now display multicultural depictions of Christ side by side: a black Jesus, an Asian Jesus, a native Jesus, and yes, even the traditional white one. Not to replace it, but to finally put it in context, to show that God's image can't be captured by a single face. And perhaps that's the larger truth here. The real Jesus wasn't white, but he also wasn't just Middle Eastern. His message transcended all boundaries, ethnic, political, and cultural. The tragedy is that for so long, his image didn't. If the face of God is love, then love has no color. But it's impossible to fully understand that truth when we keep repeating a false one. The face of Jesus we inherited tells us more about who held the brush than about the man himself. It's the face of empire, of culture, of comfort. But somewhere, underneath all that paint, is the real man. A brown-skinned preacher who walked the dusty roads of Galilee, speaking of mercy, justice, and forgiveness. He wasn't European royalty. He wasn't the mascot of colonial conquest. He was a man of the people, the poor, the marginalized, the forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we changed his face. Because a savior who looks too human, too humble, too foreign, might remind us that divinity has always lived where we least expect to find it. So the next time you see the familiar pale face gazing down from a painting, remember that it's not a photograph. It's a reflection, a mirror held up by history, and behind that mirror is the real Jesus of Nazareth, dark-skinned, brown-eyed, weathered by the desert sun, and loved by people who never cared what he looked like in the first place. Maybe the most faithful thing we can do now isn't to argue over his complexion, but to confront what it means that we ever changed it at all. Because if we were made in God's image, then maybe it's time we stop remaking him in ours. Thank you for joining me today, everyone. This was a video that I wanted to put out for quite some time and needed to find the right words. The study mentioned from 2001, I remember reading about it when I was either late middle school or early high school in a magazine that my father had. And it was so fascinating to me because I'd only ever seen the one traditional image of Jesus. And I thought it was really interesting, really cool. And I actually brought it to Sunday school back when I was still going to church. And the Sunday school teacher and the children in the class with me, my peers, rebuked it. They told me I was an idiot to believe that that's what Jesus could have looked like. And I was baffled. I mean, I'd always known that the stories took place in the Middle East, but I'd never stopped to think of what Jesus probably actually looked like. And to have scientific evidence that showed a more accurate version of Jesus, to me, it didn't matter what he looked like back then. I mean, it doesn't necessarily now, I suppose, but the fact that the idea that Jesus might have looked like a man of the area he lived and preached in was so abhorrent to people that I had been told were good people, good, loving Christians. And it kind of started to unravel everything I knew about the church. It's when I started to question things truly. Because what does it matter? The truth is, it doesn't. I myself am no longer a Christian. I don't know. I believe in a higher power, though I don't know whether I would be considered monotheistic or polytheistic. I believe in the course of a higher power, 3 things. 1, the absolute truth for me is that none of us can truly understand the mentality of the divine, and it is so outside of our understanding. And then I believe one of 2 things, that either there are multiple gods, that there are multiple divine entities, and that whatever you choose to believe is a path to the divinity that best suits you, or that if there is one divine power, that it has appeared all over the world in multiple forms, in the form that the people it is appearing to can best accept it. And then once again, all forms of faith, all forms of spirituality are still a path to the divine. And it does not matter what it looks like, because it is all a correct path. And it was this face, this unassuming face of a man from 1st century Galilee, that started me on that path. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope that you found this video entertaining, maybe even thought-provoking. If you'd like to support my channel, the best thing you can do is like, comment, and subscribe, as well as share it with your friends. We're trying to get to 1,500 subscribers by the end of the year. Otherwise, this channel might go away. Also, if you'd like to help the channel monetarily, you can become a channel member or a Patreon patron. Or you can buy some of my merch. I sell custom miniatures and anime merchandise over on eBay and Mercari, as well as I have a 4th Wall store. Right now, I have just released the Potato Time collection. Well, what is Potato Time? Well, Potato Time is what happens when you phonetically spell out PTO. And it's, in my opinion, something that not enough people do when they take PTO. Everyone thinks we have to go somewhere, we have to do something, we have to make a memory, when what you really need is rest. You need to just potato it at home and enjoy your potato time. And now you can with t-shirts, hoodies, pajama pants, athletic shorts, even beach towels and blankets. Anything you could possibly want, even a flag that shows people you are on potato time. And that's available on my 4th Wall store. Links are in the description. Until next time, everybody, I'm Mr. Sean. Thank you so much today for joining me here on Mr. Sean Productions, and I sincerely hope that you alpha great day and an even beta tomorrow. Bye-bye.